Some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
Into the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie took a visible turn this week as black
It is now day
SUV
69 in the search for Nancy Guthrie. It's Friday.
There are some new developments tonight in the ongoing search for Nancy
8
Guthrie.
weeks into this investigation, a retired Pima County homicide detective stood at the back of Nancy Guthrie's property for the first time, not watching aerial footage, not analyzing stills from a press briefing, standing in the desert scrub behind her fence line, close enough to count the doors, looking at the actual structure of the house where she was taken, and what he identified in publicly available drone footage thousands of people had already watched, footage reporters and retired investigators and online communities had examined frame by frame, had not been named by a single person in the public record before he said it out loud. Since Nancy Guthrie was forcibly removed from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, someone disconnected her doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning. 67 days since her pacemaker application dropped off her phone at 2:28 a.m., marking the moment she moved beyond the reach of any connected device in the dead of a desert night. 67 days since her family walked into a house that looked almost normal, found a back door propped open, and discovered blood on the front porch. No arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed sighting, no public forensic breakthrough of any kind. The conversation dominating this case right now is the ransom notes. Multiple communications have surfaced, claiming knowledge of Nancy or her location. Savannah Guthrie said publicly that she personally responded to some notes and believes certain ones were genuine, while acknowledging that many circulating communications are fabricated. The FBI has not publicly confirmed any specific note as verified contact from whoever took Nancy. In cases like this, verification requires specific proof of life, details only the responsible party could possess, a communication thread that holds across multiple exchanges without internal contradiction. None of that has been publicly confirmed for any note that has surfaced. That uncertainty is consuming most of the analytical attention around this case right now, and it is understandable. It is the most emotionally urgent open question. But while that conversation has been running, something documented 8 days ago has been sitting largely unexamined. On day 59, March 31st, 2026, Brian Anton reached a position at the back of Nancy's property he had never occupied before in this investigation. On foot, ground level. Went close enough to read the actual architecture of the rear of her house, rather than interpreting it from aerial footage. He had spent weeks building the relationships with neighbors that made that access possible, and what that vantage point showed him corrected an assumption he and most people watching this case had carried for weeks. The back of the property does not have sliding glass doors. There are 3 distinct access points. One door sits beneath a covered overhang fitted with glass panels across the upper section. A large glass panel nearby that multiple observers had described as a sliding door from drone footage is a fixed window. A second door on the far side of the outdoor living area has a screen. That screen door is the one Anton was told had been propped open when Annie and Tommaso arrived the morning of February 2nd. One not slightly ajar, propped. And at the far end of the property, connected to the main structure, the entrance to the casita. 3 separate rear access points. Not one of them, according to any public statement from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, showed evidence of forced entry. That absence matters because it narrows what happened to one of 2 things. Either whoever entered that night found a vulnerability Nancy herself had left accessible, or they had already created or identified their point of entry during the reconnaissance that preceded February 1st. That reconnaissance appears in the record. January 11th has been flagged as a date of specific interest, weeks before the abduction, when someone may have been near or at the property. Investigators pulled neighbor camera footage across multiple dates in January. And one neighbor told Anton something the coverage has moved past too quickly. Their dog woke around 1 a.m. on the night Nancy disappeared, fixed its attention on her house, and behaved in a way it never normally does at that hour. That is not forensic evidence, but 1 a.m. aligns precisely with everything that followed. Doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47, motion detection activated at 2:12, pacemaker offline at 2:28. If someone was moving around that property more than 40 minutes before the first device event triggered, a dog responding in the dark to that direction is a thread worth pulling. Standing in that brush behind the fence line makes the question of prior reconnaissance feel less theoretical. Beyond the boundary, it is dense desert. Cactus, low scrub, no streetlights, small animal burrows in the dirt. In darkness, mar with a partial or absent moon, Anton described it as absolute. You could move through that terrain at speed if you had already been there. If you had mapped the footing, memorized where the gates sat relative to the pool and the doors. If you had not been there before, managing anyone or anything through that landscape at night would be close to impossible. The man Anton brought with him that morning was Kurt Dabb, a retired detective from the Pima County Sheriff's Office with decades of violent crime investigation in this exact jurisdiction. Not a television consultant, the same department, the same terrain, the same type of cases. Then Dabb had watched the early drone footage from this investigation, and he noticed something while FBI agents were removing cameras that had been installed on the roof and possibly the pool house within the first week or two of the case. Those cameras were not original fixtures. They had gone up after Nancy disappeared, served whatever monitoring purpose they were placed for, and were being retrieved. But while that retrieval was happening, Dabb saw forensic photographers doing something else that he recognized immediately. He saw what appeared to him to be perspective shots being taken. A perspective shot is not a general crime scene photograph. It is not an establishing wide angle or an overhead view. It is a photograph taken from the exact physical position a specific person occupied at a specific moment during an incident, or at their height, at their angle, along their confirmed line of sight. The photographer does not choose a position. The physical evidence places a person at a location with enough precision that standing there and documenting the view becomes a meaningful forensic act. Blood spatter placement, footwear impressions, trajectory analysis, confirmed camera angles. All of that reconstruction has to exist before a perspective photograph belongs in the evidentiary record. The photograph does not discover the position. It documents a position the investigation has already established. Dabb said directly that he has never seen this technique applied in a case that did not involve a shooting, a violent assault, or a stabbing. His immediate reaction when he recognized what he was watching was that it was unusual because nothing in the public record indicated a shooting had occurred at this property. He offered two alternative explanations: height calibration from confirmed positions, or entry point visual field analysis, documenting what someone approaching over a wall at a specific location would have seen on the other side. Both are possible. Neither belongs to a missing persons search protocol. Dabb's reconstruction of what happened that night runs as follows. Someone was already inside the property when Nancy returned home from dinner on January 31st. A controlled takedown by a prepared individual who knows the layout produces no visible disruption. The interior stays ordered. Everything remains where it was. Then Nancy, still moving, Mike was guided toward the front of the house. At the front threshold, at the moment she could see the street and understand with certainty what was happening, she resisted. The blood came from that moment. The drops fell straight down. No lateral spread, no smearing, no arterial directionality. Straight down, directly beneath where she was standing. That is the physical signature of a head or nasal injury in an upright stationary person. A single contained moment of violence at a fixed point. Then movement into darkness toward a vehicle staged far enough from the property to avoid every nearby camera but close enough to move once she cleared the fence line. That vehicle required a driver, which means the minimum configuration is two people inside or at the house and one behind the wheel down the street. Dabb described three individuals working assigned positions with a prepared route as the scenario most consistent with the logistics of what appears to have been accomplished, and now placed the perspective shots inside that. Investigators standing in specific positions at that property, photographing specific sightlines, means they had already identified from physical evidence where particular people stood during the violence that produced the blood at that threshold. That visual record exists in the investigative file. What was visible from the confirmed position at the front door, what the entry points looked like from inside them, what the geometry of this property reveals about how someone moved through it in the early hours of February 1st. All of it documented, none of it public. What the perspective shots confirm is that investigators were not running a missing person protocol at this property within the first 2 weeks. They were reconstructing a violent crime, and that reconstruction was detailed enough to place specific people at specific locations before the public conversation even understood what it was looking at.